Great. Paul, would you like me to share?
Yes, I would, please. It makes more sense for you to share because you've got the bulk of the slides.
Right. So this session takes us to the end of the day. So take it with both Pauls.
Thank you. Here's me making a huge enhancement, a huge assumption that people are back from the break. But anyway, let's carry on. So we wanted to bring you up to date with what's been going on with bulk transactions. There's a huge amount of work gone into this over the last PI, largely led by Paul Baker, who's going to present the majority of this and just going to give some context at the start. So Paul, should we move on? First of all, I wanted to provide some context. So please click on, sorry. Why have we put so much effort into bulk in extending what is there at the moment and making sure it works the way that the organizations we're dealing with want it to work, or can support their various modes of operation? And the reason is that for Mojo Loop, it is one of the most important use cases, the foundational use cases, probably second only to P2P. It forms the basis of a whole bunch of other slightly more complex use cases. So for an operator's perspective, you can look at bulk, electronic cash transfers, G2P, however you want to call it, these higher level use cases. They're infrastructural. They're what you have to have in place before you can do perhaps some of the more complex stuff, because you have to get money into people's wallets. However you choose to implement this, these are all use cases where you're getting money from a large organization and putting it in the pockets of ordinary people to spend. So obviously it supports salaries, but there's also social payments. So we're talking about COVID relief, we're talking about pensions, all that kind of thing. And we've also discovered through our experience in Myanmar with WinePay that actually bulk is really important for loan disbursements as well. There's lots of organizations that don't want to disperse loans one by one. They do what's the equivalent of a salary run at the end of the day or the end of the week to disperse all those loans all in one go. And that was a bit of a surprise to us, but it emphasized again just how important bulk is to Mojo Loop and the community. Paul, next slide, please. So what's happening? Well, we have a bulk service within Mojo Loop, and it works as advertised. But theory somewhat hit reality when we started rolling it out with WinePay. It wasn't sufficient to meet the real world need. So what we've been doing for the last actually now 2 PIs or 1.5 PIs is extending the bulk service to meet those real world requirements. In particular, in talking to people who want to use bulk payments, in particular electronic cash transfers, we found a whole load of subtleties around it that we really needed to accommodate. And that's what a lot of the work has been focused on. We've introduced a range of controls and parameters. Not me. It wasn't just about the controls and parameters. It was also about scale and things like timeouts and fees and all that kind of thing. So we've introduced a range of controls. Paul will talk about them in more depth in a while. But from my perspective, the 3 key parameters that we've added are a maximum fees limit, for example. So you say, I'm not prepared to pay more than, I don't know, $500 to do all of these tens of thousands of transactions, whatever it may be. And then how you carry out, do you do it as a single phase or a multiple phase? So do you say, here's my list, just complete it, just do the whole lot? Or can you just do the discovery phase on my list so I can see who I can actually reach? And then will you come back with that? Then I might modify the list and give it back to you and don't bother with the discovery phase this time around. So that's the three ways of initiating the transaction to give people some control over identify who is going to receive the money and whether they really are in a position to receive those funds into the accounts that have been nominated. And then there's expiry, a timeout. If the whole thing is taking you like 24 hours, then maybe you want to time it out and try again. Well, you will, of course, get a list of which ones actually succeeded. So it's all about giving control to those people who are perhaps wanting to submit a list and have more complex requirements around controlling the transfers. Next slide, please. Yeah, the broader context as well, because we're not just aiming at WinePay. They informed a lot of our requirements, but we're thinking more broadly. We're thinking longer term as well. We're thinking about how do we get Mojo Loop ready for integration with the wider ecosystem, because payments, astonishing to us payments people, but payments isn't actually everything. There's other things you have to do with your life as well. So we've been looking at integration with some form of digital identity service, and MoSIP is the obvious one simply because it is open source. But there would need, I mean, that's not such a difficult task because within the Mojo Loop architecture, of course, we have ALS to handle routing. There would need to be some, as we call it, double tap looking up so identity to account, then account to DFSP. But that's not insurmountable. We've done something very similar in WinePay anyway with identifying accounts. Integration with some form of beneficiary management system, such as OpenD2P, that really would open up the whole bulk payment market to Mojo Loop. There's so much synergy between these three open source programs that it seems a logical thing to do, and I know that we are going to be spending time over the next 3 months thereabouts looking at that broader integration. So that's looking to the future rather than what we've done so far. And I think I should now hand over to Paul Baker to talk about what we've been doing now in the last PI. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Two Pauls. That's a great introduction as to why it's important. So I'm here today to go through some of the enhancements that we have been building into the bulk functionality into Mojo Loop. So let me start off by talking about the functionality that we've got at the moment. To do that, I've put a very simplistic diagram together. So let me explain that. On the left side, we've got the bulk payer DFSP, who are really sending the bulk messages. And on the right side, we've got the bulk payee DFSP, who are receiving that bulk message and then doing the bulk disbursement. So, and then in the middle, we've got the Mojo Loop bulk functionality as exists at the moment. I've also enlarged the SDK Schema Adapter, both the payer and the payee side. And the reason for that is that's going to be a key component that we are extending in these enhancements to be able to provide that extra functionality that Paul was talking about earlier. So why do we need to enhance it? And the reason is because the current functionality comes with some limitations. So I'm going to sort of talk through those limitations with the purpose of showing or being able to validate with the design later on that we in fact do cover all of those limitations. So let's start out with that. So on the payer side, we have a limitation with the number of transactions that you can include in a message. And in addition to that, a bulk message can only go to one payee DFSP. That implies that discovery has happened beforehand, so that you in fact know where the DFSP, where the transaction transfer amounts are going, and really implies that we need some complexity in the integration to be able to manage this. And Then the SDK Schema Adapter at the moment currently only supports synchronous bulk calls, and then that's a bit of a limitation that doesn't adapt to some of the use cases Paul mentioned. And then on top of that, well, as I mentioned, discovery is not part of it, but we do have a bulk quotes and a bulk transfers message within the Mojo Loop, and they are separated like that and need to be called that way. On the pay DFSP side, we have also two limitations. The first one is that if we adding in a bulk use case into a scheme, we will need to support or to provide bulk support for anyone who can accept bulk payments. All pay DFSPs that can accept bulk payments need to enhance the integrations. And the integration that is supported currently is only a single phase integration, which means it may be vulnerable to reconciliation errors. So let me jump to the next slide. Okay, enhancements. So what are we planning on these enhancements? We are building on the design that are shown here. I'm calling it the PI 19 enhancements because we fully intend to complete this functionality in the next PI. And the enhancements that I'm going to be taking you through right at the moment are designed to overcome all of these limitations that I mentioned here. So next slide. Let's talk about the components that are going to be extended. The first component is the Mojo Loop itself, the bulk functionality in the center. And we're extending it in two fundamental ways. The first one is we improving the test coverage of the current test sets. So we're going to improve the test coverage by adding in extra tests into the bulk TTK test collection. And then we're going to be incorporating that test collection into the ISC so that it can be run from the ISC pipeline. And that, of course, makes sense because then those tests can be used as deployment tests. Then lastly, we're going to be creating a test environment so that we can run those tests externally through the gateway. In other words, for example, through the SDK Schema Adapter. Then we're going to be adding in a new functionality, which is adding in a patch notification in bulk transfers, and this allows us to have more complex integrations, so we can have a two-phase or reserve and commit phase integration into our backend system, which will reduce our reconciliation. Next, I would like to talk about the changes that we're planning on making on the SDK Schema Adapter. And the SDK Schema Adapter sits in two places. It sits on the payer side and on the payee side. The stuff that we're adding in on the payer side is really we're adding in the discovery call. And then on top of that, we will be batching the bulk messages. And this allows us to overcome two limitations. The first one is we can then send that bulk message to multiple payee DFSPs. So we're no longer limited to one payee DFSP. But on top of that, we also no longer are limited to the 1,000 transactions in bulk message. We can batch those out in thousands and therefore get the best of both worlds. Then there's another functionality that we're adding in, and that is the SDK Schema Adapter we're going to be extending to allow asynchronous transfers. Now, this is important because some use cases cannot support synchronous calls because they take obviously a very long time. And it's really important that if something happens or a component in your system needs to restart in the middle of a batch transfer, that it picks up from where it left off, and it doesn't really need to restart or anything like that. An important consequence of this function that we are adding, this feature, this asynchronous feature that we're adding in, is that our previous design in our SDK Schema Adapter was found to be wanting and would not have met the requirements for this asynchronous mode. So that feature is one of the driving forces in our sort of new architecture that we're pulling into the Schema Adapter, which I'll be talking about just now. Then the last feature on the payer side that I've got there is this flexibility in the calling methods. So Paul Macon took us through some of those use cases that we went through. And you can see a wide variety of use cases. And the result is we want the system to be easy to integrate and flexible. And the result is we've added a whole lot of calling options into the API call that changes quite fundamentally how the system responds. Okay, and then we're also making changes on the payee SDK Schema Adapter side. And really what we're doing here is if a bulk transaction or bulk integration has been built for that DFSP on the payee side, then we use it. But if one hasn't been built, then we will sort of demultiplex or break the bulk message as it comes in, and then send that message out as individual transfers, and then collate those results and send back a bulk message on the Mojo Loop side. And the advantage in doing that is actually quite large. And the reason is it makes it much easier to take a new bulk case. Well, if you want to take a new use case of bulk live into a system, an existing scheme, let's say, for example, WinePay, where they've got 32 different DFSPs connected, then they don't need to modify each of the participants' integrations to extend them to include bulk. What they can do is just upgrade as is and get the system working, and then make changes to take advantage of the bulk payment when the need arises for the different participants. And they can do this in their own time. So this decoupling of the bulk functionality is, in fact, a massive advantage. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the options in the flexible calling of the bulk message. So we have an option to auto-accept party. This means that if your backend system doesn't have a facility for validating party information, then you don't need to deal with the complexity. You can just auto-accept it. And similarly, we've got something for quotes. So you can auto-accept a quote with a list of fee limits that you can provide in numerous currencies. So you can set those different fee limits, and we'll only accept the quote if that fee limit per transaction has not been violated. Okay. Then the next two options we've got is only validate party or skip party lookup, and that really allows us to have a bit of flexibility as to when the discovery gets called and how it gets called, just to provide that extra flexibility in the integration systems. Synchronous, asynchronous mode. We still want to support synchronous mode when Paul Macon went through some of those use cases like payment of salary. Some bulk messages are inherently small, so we don't really need to worry about asynchronous. And it's really advantageous to be able to provide that integration in a synchronous manner because it simplifies that integration build. So really what we're saying is we not only building the functionality, we're making it easy to integrate to your system. And then, as Paul mentioned, we have a bulk expiration, which is also important. Okay, so let's talk about the asynchronous feature and the consequence that it happened. So I would like to talk a little bit about the technical solution that's currently in the SDK Schema Adapter. So currently it uses a really clever little mechanism using hub sub functionality of Redis to make sure that that even if the system has been scaled horizontally, that we receive the same message that was sent out and respond to the same provider. But that functionality stops working as soon as you go to an asynchronous model. So if there's, let's say if a part needed to restart, then that synchronous would end and you could recall it. Now, we don't actually want that functionality when we are talking about bulk with high volumes. So And like I said before, one of the key features is if any part of the system needs to restart for whatever reason, we need it to pick up from exactly where it left off. Otherwise, it causes other knock-on effects that then need new systems to deal with. So let's do it right from the beginning. And so the result of that is we needed to adopt a new architectural design in the SDK. And the one chosen is the same one that they're using in the reference architecture, which is the DDD, domain-driven design, and CQRS design. So, let me go back. There are some advantages in choosing that same design, besides the fact that it actually just solves the whole problem. And that is, we can reuse some of the tools that are being built by the reference architecture, and there's people and developers have got familiar with these tools and these design patterns, and we can reuse some of the libraries like the auditing, the capital, and the scheduling. And because it uses dependency injection, it is independent of infrastructure, and this seems really important because this is likely to be deployed in lots of different environments and with different participants and different scale of use cases. So to being able to configure the infrastructure so that it can run at a smaller scale or a much larger scale is a really big advantage. Now, this design does come with some disadvantages, and we try to cover those with trace headers supporting observability right from the onset, along with multiple levels of testing and unit testing, their integration and functional testing. I didn't talk about some of the disadvantages, and that is that additional complexity about having a distributed solution. So let's jump to the next slide. So I'm trying to talk about architecture, which is very technical, at a very non-technical level. So I hope I'm doing all right here. But it does mean that I'm glancing over some of the ideas and not dwelling on them. And I'm going to do the same here. So the SDK Schema Adapter, we're going to break this down into 4 parts. So we've got a backend API, an event handler, command handler, and an FSPIOP API. So the backend API really handles messages and talks to your backend core system. And FSPIOP really handles communication with Mojo Loop. And then we've got an event handler and a command handler. Now, the reason why I want to show you this really rough pattern is because there's some real big advantages in using this design, and I want people to understand the consequence of using this design pattern. So let's say, for example, we've got a message coming in from our core backend system to perform a bulk action, and it goes to our backend API, which then passes it through to the event handler. Now, the event handler's responsibility is just to receive a whole lot of events and then issue commands, consequences of those events. So it then issues a command. Now, the command handler then interprets that command and then issues an action that needs to be done. So it sends a message to the FSPIOP, which then interacts with Mojo Loop and comes back with a response. And that response goes to the event handler, which then interprets that event and then sends it through to the command handler, and the command performs the action it needs to and then responds to the backend API, which is then sent back to your core banking system. Now, this design is really decoupled, and that's one of the big powerful parts of it. So so it can scale horizontally. So this isn't a scale problem. We can expand out the number of providers handling on the command handler or event handler. So we've got horizontal scaling, Then also reliability. So we can, if we capture these queues of messages in between, we can have a part of the system restart completely, and we can pick up from exactly where it left off. And that's one of the requirements that we need here. And lastly, is it becomes very easy to extend this functionality or customize it. And I'll give you two examples. Let's say we needed to put in a scheduling system for this bulk messaging. So we have a complex implementation where we need a complex scheduling of the bulk messages across a 24-hour period. So what we can do there is we could interrupt the flow here and then send it to add an extension into the command handler that allows for this scheduling, or a new component that performs that scheduling. And really, it's only that one part that needs to be modified to enable that complex level of functionality. So in other words, we are building on the current solution and without taking anything away, and creating something that can be very customized or to a particular solution, or is generic, however we decide to build it. Then here's another example. Let's say there's another system that you use to be able to verify accept parties. So complete third-party solution, and requires now a custom integration because of the mechanism that it needs to interact with. Now there's nothing stopping us from building in another unit into this, which can read off an event from the event handler, or the event handler can issue a command to that unit, and that unit can then respond and cause the appropriate auto accept party functionality, and then return with the result. So this decoupling of the components really means that we're designing this for the future, and so that it can be built on in levels in an agile way, adding in extending functionality, and really provide a rich solution. Okay, I hope they came across all right. So where are we now? So what we've done is we've broken up these extension requirements into 4 epics. We've got the design epic, we've got the MVP build, we've got the improving in the test coverage. So the MVP build and the improving of the test coverage, they're in progress at the moment. So they're being worked on. And then the last part of this, which is the extending the Mojo Loop FSP IOP to include a bulk patch notification, that's been started already. It's gone to the CCB and been presented there. But from a build point of view, it's still sitting it out to do this. So that's where we are. That's our progress. Let's talk about the team of guys helping. It's not limited to these guys, but these are the main guys who are getting into the meat, making code changes. So thanks to this team, Emerson, Kevin, Miguel, Sam, Shashi, Shri, Vijay, and Yevan. Good work. And lastly, I've got a slide showing references. So we are building this in the open source. So you can follow it if you're interested in, and you can review some of the designs which has been published as PRs. So please follow these links. There's a Kanban board, there's the repo. We've got really good detailed design documentation, which is sitting in a PR at the moment. And when the right time comes, we will upload that in the formal Mojo Loop documentations, and then we have that CCB issue on the bulk patch notification. You can check it out and have a look at the API changes that we're talking. Thanks. Over to you, Samin. Paul?
Thank you so much, Paul and Paul. We've got just about, maybe I'll give, I see a lot of chatter in the chat there, but looks like there's some great engagement. Thanks for always participating there. I I'll give it to one question if somebody wants to answer one question.
I think the chat line has brought all the questions out.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Quickly, Simeon, I just wanted to thank these guys for making so much progress in this. Basically, over this last PI, this is all of the ideas that had been worked on before, excuse me, are really coming together. And this is really great to see. The one thing that I think is called out in the chat that it's worth bringing forward is Pedro's note that, it's excellent to bring this pattern in because it's a simplifying way of thinking about the different ways in which the systems connect together. It does bring some complexity, and we should be careful about applying that, blindly, basically, and looking at it for benefit. And if we don't see that benefit, we should maybe rethink. But it's definitely a huge step forward on where we were. The other comment in the chat here is that there is a separation between the campaign management functions and the transfers. And it's important that what we recognize is whoever's in the room with the participant at the time the conversation's being had is going to be handed the requirement. And so if you're in there talking with them as Mojo Loop, they're going to say, wouldn't it be great if you could format the phone numbers correctly, or if you could correct errors in the zip codes? And you have to recognize that that's not our job to do. We take payments properly addressed. In fact, we even help you address them to a point, and then we route them, or we don't, and we tell you why we didn't. And it's up to a campaign manager to make a business out of making this other stuff easy. And of course, verifying that these people are real. They really do live in the village they say they live in, and not in an office tower in Nairobi. It's by using satellite imagery or whatever they do. That's their bailiwick. And once they've assembled the batch to hand it off, and what we've heard is, I think from the WinePay in particular, is that there are certain aspects of this work we said it's an easy thing to push onto the campaign manager. That if there isn't a campaign manager, in the case there is in the case of loan disbursements, they have to do this work themselves, and it's hard for them to do. And it would be hard for us to get 30 of them to do it the same way and get it right every time. So there's definitely advantage to doing some things like break bulk and reassembly, aggregation of results that not theoretically part of what we do, but that's not unreasonable. But there's a feature creep risk there. So that's my only, keep your shields on full when you take these meetings.
I would agree entirely. I would agree entirely, Miller. But if a participant, bear in mind that a participant is likely to be providing the financial side of the campaign manager service, and the campaign manager might be doing it on behalf of, I don't know, an NGO or a large corporate or anyone. So there is definite separation of responsibilities. But if a participant wants to do some of that, address validation, for example, that's up to them. It's absolutely nothing to do with us. But they might choose to do it on behalf of the campaign manager if they wanted to. But that's their decision, nothing to do with us. We just accept payments list and process them.
Brilliant. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks so much, Miller. I think we'll bring that to a close there. Thank you so much, Paul and Paul. For those of you who are able to, I'd like to invite you all to just come off video and wave. Just want to see who's joined us as we bring this to a close. Great to see all those lovely folks in your home offices and wherever else it is you may be. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Very familiar faces, some new. Great to see you all. Thank you for joining us. Oh, this is great. This is wonderful. I'm going to give everybody a chance to just quickly wave if your video will allow you to. Excellent. There we go. Oh, excellent. That's really good to see. Thank you all so much for joining us. We will regroup again tomorrow. For some of you, it might be tomorrow already at 11 a.m. UTC for day 2 of our convening. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a good rest of your afternoon, evening, or morning. See you again tomorrow.